Hi, I'm Wayne Boucher. I work here at the Stadium Theater. I'm the scenic carpenter. I build all the sets for the Stadium Theater productions. I build them here in the Conservatory right next door to the theater. Today we'll be talking about what I use styrofoam and how I manipulate the styrofoam to make different scenes. We get the styrofoam at a local building supply. It comes in different thicknesses. So 1/2 inch thick, some 1 inch thick, and 2 inch thick. It's readily available, so it works out well that we can get it wet at a moment's notice, and I don't have to order it and wait for it to come in. Some of the tools that we use mostly are these retractable knives, and different types of saws. And this stuff is really good because you can use just about any woodworking tool that you have, whether it's a table saw or a chop saw or a jigsaw. A lot of people like to use sawzalls to cut it into shape. I use the bandsaw to cut different shapes like these. Anything that will cut wood will cut this much faster and much easier. So that's the material we use, and most of the, like I said, any woodworking tool you use works great for carving and moving the styrofoam. As far as the glue goes, that's another story. Not just any wood glue will work on styrofoam. A lot of glues will melt it, and then you won't get any bond at all. Like the 3M products are what I usually use, but they're very difficult to use because they melt it if you use too much. And then you won't get any bond whatsoever. So we use a lot of hot glue. This works best for most applications. When I have a large area to cover, then I'll use the spray glue sparingly and stick the two pieces together like this. That's just the spray adhesive holding these two together. And it works really well if it doesn't destroy the styrofoam. But the hot glue, which is what's holding this together, works really well also. So that's basic glue and the materials that we'll be talking about today. So let's get to some moving of some product. So what I have here are, these are rocks, believe it or not. So we'll build a small stone wall by carving away and turning these flat pieces of styrofoam into what I'm hoping will be rocks. We just use different types of rasps. These are all for plaster or wood. Some people use these on their vegetables. This is a microplane. And we just dig away at it. It moves it extremely fast. Sandpaper. This is probably extremely rough. It's too small, doesn't have a number on it, but it's probably a 36 grit. That moves it very fast as well. Or you can cut it with these. This is a pull saw. It's for very fine work. Very small teeth, so I don't tear the stuff to pieces. And you can see it cuts through it in seconds. Now I've ruined my rock, I have to fix it. So if you don't have all day, and you need to really move some product, you can use other tools. I find these wire brushes go through the styrofoam pretty fast. course, you have to be extremely careful because they are still woodworking tools, and they will, as fast as they go through that styrofoam, they will go through your hand as well. And then you just clean it up. And the finer the paper you use, just like with wood, the smoother her finish you will get. So we go from what was just torn to shreds to something fairly smooth that will accept paint, which we can talk about later. So once you get your stones into shape, we can then take a substrate, 1/4" Luan, little spray adhesive, spray adhesive for the rocks. Let that dry for a second. We can start to build a wall out of stones. Of course, I have a few more, but that's one way that we can build a stone wall, is by cutting each individual stone and then applying them to a substrate. Another way we work is by sticking it right to the styrofoam and then digging into the styrofoam so we get a deeper three-dimensional look. And that's most of the stonework that we'll do in building small walls. Let's talk about wood for a minute. I want to turn a piece of styrofoam into what looks more like wood. So we'll do less digging with rasps and saws and more work with the razor knife. We'll take the edges off. Take the tops off. And we could put some wood grain in it. What's nice about working with, or trying to produce things like wood or rocks is there's no rules. It doesn't matter if the wood is a little crooked or a little misshaped, because that's nature. The more misshaped and out of the ordinary it looks, the more natural it looks. So cutting straight lines is difficult and would be counterproductive. So we cut grains and that, and then we'll grab a wire brush and really put the wood grain look into our wood. Get more to look more like a weather-beaten piece of lumber, which is what I started with here. I took off the edges Sanded it off a little bit. This is not as weather beaten as with a wire brush, but it gives you an idea of how it's going to look like when we get to the painting phase. It will help you understand how it's going to look like. So as the carver, my job is basically to help the painter get it to look more like wood or rocks. The painter could paint a piece of styrofoam that I haven't even touched and get it to look like wood. But if I get it to look like wood before they paint, that makes their job easier and they can make it look even more like wood. So it's not just a flat piece that they're trying to make look three-dimensional. It's already two-dimensional that they just have to fix to make look three-dimensional. Right, so one of the main glues I use is the hot glue. It's very versatile. Will glue almost anything together. It's not super strong. It's not for structural gluing, but styrofoam is certainly not structural. If you pile it on, it will melt the styrofoam. And we don't have to wait for it. Glued it together wrong. See, I made a mistake already. Let's try starting again. So hot glue is what I use the most. It's not structural, but it works well for styrofoam because styrofoam isn't structural. And it's pretty quick. Not as fast as the spray adhesive, which is almost instant. But it's very fast. You just have to wait for it to cool. It's like sitting around waiting for glue to dry. We do that a lot around here. So once that hardens up and sticks together, we'll be in this position. This used to look just like that. And then we take our knives and we can cut off these edges so it looks a little more weathered. So that it doesn't look too smooth. Blend it in a little bit with a little sandpaper. And then this will turn into that. I don't know if the glue is quite dry yet, but we'll give it a shot. Good sharp knife is helpful. You'll know it's not sharp when it starts to tear at it. Here, I'll go backwards. When it starts to do this business, then you'll know it's time to change the blade. I should note this, all these products, the 1/2 inch, the 1 inch, and this 2-inch all come in 4x8 sheets, like plywood. And we cut it on the table saw or the chop saw to get the sizes that we need and the shapes we need. Take this old glue off. And like anything else, the glue is only as strong as the product. So you can't expect the glue to hold extra weight when the styrofoam itself will let go. Pretty good. Some sandpaper. Just a spot. Now we have 2. Ready for paint.
Hi, I'm Kathy Provencal. This is Terry Beitler. We're painters here at the Stadium Theater. This is the Conservatory workshop where we build the worlds that our characters live in. The best part of working here is how everything kind of starts with an idea. We decide how a few trees can make a forest, or Wayne carves us an iceberg out of snow and it becomes a glacier. This is how stage painting works, or scenic painting works. You might have seen Wayne carve some wood from styrofoam pieces. I'm going to show you how we make that styrofoam actually look like wood. This is just a few examples that we do here. We can make marble, we make stone, we make trees, we do paper mache, and a lot of this process is part of a team where we collaborate. We decide along with the producers what scene we're going to build, and in a relatively short time we build the world that the characters live in. So some of the tools that we're going to use here, basic latex paint we get from Lowe's or Sherwin-Williams, wherever, just latex paint, house paint. But because we are a theater, as the paint comes in, we will add fireproofing to all the paint as it comes in. It mixes about 6 inches per gallon, 6 ounces per gallon, and it'll help as a fire retardant with all of the paint and styrofoam that we're doing. It works on whether we paint wood, whether we paint plastic, foam, anything like that, all of the paper mache products. So some of the tools that we're using here, regular paint brushes, we'll use a rag, a plastic bag, sponges, we'll use a spray gun. This gun in particular is just a cup sprayer. It'll hook to a compressor, we'll mix some paint, adjust these knobs here to adjust our spray volume. And it's a great way that we can paint a large area in a relatively short time. And it's a neat trick how we can highlight something to look 3D. So I guess we'll get started. Let's open some paint. So since we have wood planks here, already getting ready for paint, this is the first coat. So you can say primer coat if you're used to painting a room or a house or anything like that. You get your first coat, we'll let it dry, and then we'll get started with some of the detail. As Wayne said, the more detail we can add, the better. So he carves in a lot of, grooves or knots per se in the wood, and then we'll highlight those. We'll make it really come to life with the paint. So as the next coat, if we have flat pieces that are going to be wood, we can use a roller. And what Terry's doing is rolling over the top of something that's got a darker coat underneath, because then we can use this wood grain tool. We're going to show you how to make some flat wood look 3D. So this is called a rocker tool, and really you'll see that there's wood grain, raised areas here. It's kind of like a rubber stamp on a stick, and I'm going to show you how to make that turn into wood grain. So the key to this is to move it back and forth, and you'll see it takes the first layer of paint and lets that darker layer show through. It starts to look like wood. Different artists will do texture a different way. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Give it a try. But you can see as it dries, you can start seeing that this really has the texture of wood. You can see that there's different knots here, and then we'll add highlights. It takes a little finesse, but you get used to it, and because it's paint, if you need to paint it again, you just do it again. You can see the difference here. These particular pieces, we used a lighter background and then used the tool over the top. And then to make it look a little more weathered, use the dark underneath and put the lighter on the top. We'll use the sprayer, and I'll show you how we can spray highlights on these longer pieces of plain wood, styrofoam. We'll spray some highlights on here, and then we'll dry brush some wood grain. So I have paint guns hooked up here to a compressor, and a lighter brown paint here inside the cup. And I'm going to show you how we're going to put highlights on this previously painted styrofoam that looks like wood. And this is how we're going to make some detail, do some detail work. This particular gun, this nozzle here, when it's pointing up and down like this, you spray up and down. This is just showing the width of your spray, if you will. So let's give it a go. So giving light spray of paint so it's not real wet and drippy. You'll start putting some highlight here. You can see it starts looking like there's light coming on to this dark wood. Give it a little give it a little life. So usually I like to think of, you know, what we're painting for, where the light would be coming from, how we'd make the most texture out of what we're doing here. And then, Terry, if you want to get this, while she's painting the light on this wood, I will get another brush ready to add some additional details. All right, that looks great. So the next step that we would do, we'd kind of let that dry a little bit, and we would make sure all of these green holes are covered up. The next technique is really, people call it dry brushing, but it's really not a dry brush. It's just a little tiny bit of paint on the brush, and my secret weapon is a water bottle. We'll show you how we help to move the paint. Because it's latex paint, everything's water-based, and this helps add a lot of texture. So, along with using that rocking tool, we would dip the paint just slightly into an accent color. In this case, we're using black, and thinking about where the shadows are, where the lines would be, how the grooves would work. I just kind of wet the wood a little bit, and then in an even strokes, very lightly, we start brushing in, blending in with the paint that we just put on there, some shadow. See, as we move down the wood, or the styrofoam, we push a little bit harder, we put a little heavier where we want the dark shadows, and then right in the edge where that wet paint is, we're going to just blend a little bit, and then just add more water as needed. And then it gives us that illusion that there's some texture to this really flat piece of styrofoam. Perfect. So you can see now that as it's starting to dry a little bit, you see how the blending works. You see how the black is showing more of a shadow, and it gives us a little depth to the piece of wood. This is how the corbels that Wayne built previously, if you want to grab those, Terry, we'll go ahead and paint those so that you can see how this started out like that. This one started out just like that, and we'll show you how we get them that way. Again, we'll do light layers on here, making sure we cover up all of these words and lines. So it's not necessarily a quick process, but we have so much to paint. Typically we come in and do a lot of base coating. First coat, get everything that needs to be painted one color with a fire retardant in there, and then move on to the detail work. It certainly does take a whole creative team to get to this point. The spray gun gives us this fine mist that works really great for a softness that you don't really get with the brush. We could take a paintbrush and just roll all this, or paint this with a brush, but you don't get this softness that this the sprayer gives you. We've used lots of different tools here in deciding what kind of texture works, and every artist is going to do something a little different. But for me, I really like this we'll add the details to that one. The corbels we made are just about dry, so as it's still a little bit tacky here, we'll do that same treatment where we add some black texture, so we kind of match it to that one. And it'll look like a rustic, part of a rustic beam. Add just a little bit of paint on the brush, a little tiny bit of water, and we'll add black in the creases here, and just drag the paint, blending as you go. Can be a little heavier in some areas, lighter in others, just to get this impression of rustic beam. When you're doing this, you just have to be careful that if the brown paint underneath is too wet, you start getting a very muddy effect. So very lightly with the black on top, just dragging the brush in the appropriate areas to make the lines shade in the appropriate places. That's really how we do that. Another product that we use, a lot of paper mache. I think you will see this tree here is made from cardboard and paper mache. So Wayne has put the texture on this by wrinkling the paper mache to look like bark. The first layer is on here, and I think you'll see as we start adding a little bit of light with the light brown, how this bark really comes to life. We have a few layers, black, brown, and now I'll add just a little bit of light with this spray gun, and you'll see how the softness we talked about using the spray gun. So if I stand to the side a little bit, the way this is wrinkled, you'll start seeing it's just catching the paper in just the right way to get in the creases, and it starts looking like bark. It really highlights just the light areas. Catching just the ridges in just the right way. Making sure that we go lightly up and down, leaving some of the darkness to show through. And we have a tree front. Later what we would do is probably add another layer of lighter, either lighter brown or something with a little yellow in there. We might take the sponge and put moss on the bottom with a light green, depending on what look we're going for. We might add white with glitter if we wanted this to be a snowy scene, but most of our trees start just in this way. First we start with the texture of the bark, we start with the base coat, then a lighter highlights, and then some shading, and final touches with, whatever scene we're doing.